Dale Pond is our next speaker, our first speaker for Sunday morning here. I don't have any notes to introduce Dale with. I count him among that very special category of most favorite people on earth. We've known each other since 1987. We've been through a lot of adventures together, and he's helped me sponsor some classes at times, and of course I'm always promoting his website and his lists and his work. I don't think I've seen very many people anywhere who are more dedicated to a cause. Dale started studying sympathetic vibratory physics back in the early 80s, went to Virginia Beach to access the Edgar Cayce Library, got a lot of information from that, found out about John Keeley, and quickly became one of the world's experts on Keeley. By the time we met in 87, I'd been hearing his name everywhere. And I was, I got to meet this guy. And I heard the expression sympathetic vibratory physics and thought, yeah, there's definitely something to that. And so at that time, Dale was publishing a journal which ran for quite a few issues and had tremendously valuable information in it. After we met, I started writing for his journal, and then eventually he folded the journal into his internet activities, and that's where he's been doing a lot of work. I think the most obvious achievement that Dale has made among many, many achievements, because he's a master craftsman and builder. He can build anything to look just like the most elegant thing you've ever seen, has been the Dynasphere. And he built that a few years ago, the first one, called Atlan, and people have reported remarkable experiences around it. And now knowledge of that is growing, and people are very, very interested in that work, and it's really good to see that. It's really refreshing to see somebody becoming more well-known who really deserves to be more well-known. Here's Dale Pond.
Good morning. Glad you could all come. Like Michael was saying, I began this work in 1984. That's when I discovered Keeley's biography tucked away in the Cayce Library. Can you hear me? I found Keeley's, sounds awful loud to me. I found Keeley's biography in the Cayce Library in Virginia Beach in 1984. And when I opened that book and I read those words that Keeley himself had written, I knew instantly that I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to understanding what this man was talking about and what did he do. And it's been a long journey. In 1995 and 96, I got a small team together and we endeavored to recreate one of Keeley's machines, and that's the one sitting in the up front. From those early studies, the thing that jumps out about Keeley's work to everybody who reads it is he made these fabulous machines that would power industry, and he did levitation and all kinds of ideas of free energy. But we couldn't really understand what he was doing. So my idea was, well, let's create the machine. And by working with the machine, that's the way I learn, is hands-on. And we'll start to unfold and discover what this man did. So we made a free energy machine. In 1997, I took it to a new energy conference just like this in Denver. First time I had the Dynasphere out in public. And some of you were there and saw this. Then I come back from lunch one day, and there's all these women standing there with their hands out to this machine. 8 or 9 or 10 women standing around the Dynasphere. And I asked them what they were doing. And this lady says, we're standing here feeling the love come from this machine. And in that instant, my entire life changed. Because we didn't know anything about this love this energy that she was obviously feeling, which she called love. And the other women agreed with her. I wasn't feeling it. I was not aware of this thing. But these other people were picking up on it. So that began a whole new departure in my research. I wanted to know what this energy was, why she was feeling it, why I wasn't feeling it, why did she call it love, What is love? And on and on and on. Myriads of questions. So, as a type of open laboratory experiment, we put the Dinosphere in a center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we invited anybody who wanted to come in to experience this because I wanted to see their experiences. And we had hundreds of people come through there in the next 2 years. And we saw things that were just, to me, were mind-boggling. One of the most dramatic things was people were being healed. And this put me back because I didn't want to, I purposely stayed away from the health field all those years. But here I was thrown in the middle of it. People were being healed. We didn't know why. We didn't know what was going on. People were having mental experiences. People who came in who were mentally unstable would straighten right up almost instantly. We had people come in who were devastated emotionally, and within minutes they were radiantly joyful, and all that sorrow or sadness or whatever it was gone. We had people expand spiritually, where they became much more open and loving and gentle human beings as opposed to like a redneck mechanic or something, not concerned about anything. Totally changed. Completely changed their lives. And I wanted to know what the heck was going on. So I hit the books. I'm a very dedicated researcher. I dug into every book I could find. I talked to anybody who had any ideas about any of this process that we were witnessing. And I gradually began to piece together a theory that would account for not only what we thought we were witnessing, but the construct of the machine. I mean, here's a machine made out of metal. I made it myself. I'm intimately familiar with every piece of metal that's in it. And I had to bring the material aspect of this experiment into complete sympathy with these other things that we were seeing. And we do have a theory now. And lo and behold, Walter Russell, some of you are familiar with Walter Russell's work, is almost identical to what we were seeing. And some of his work explains what we were seeing. And I also found another gentleman named Dr. Phineas Quimby from the mid-1800s. His work bears on what we were seeing. And as I was learning this new interpretation of the Keeley material, I went back to the old Keeley material and reread it from this perspective. And lo and behold, here's Keeley talking about harnessing mind force. He said there's only one force in the universe, and that's mind. All other forces are derivatives of that one force. Russell says exactly the same thing. So we have what seems to be a paradox in talking to an audience of engineers and scientists who deal in the material world. They don't even want to hear about the so-called spiritual world. It's really the mind construct of the universe. They don't want to hear about it because they don't have a paradigm that ties the physical to this mental realm. That's been the problem all along. So we've got all the psychic activity and telekinetic activity and all this stuff going on, the research in Russia along these lines, and nobody has a paradigm to explain it. Actually, there is. Russell explains it. But as some of you know, you can study Russell your whole life and not understand what he's talking about. There's pieces missing. And you can study Keeley your whole life and not understand it because there's pieces missing. We actually do not have Keeley's research, so it's like a detective story. You've got to put all these pieces together. So that's what I've been doing. So what it boils down to in black and white is the science of SVP, and it's rapidly becoming a science that can be applied, because we've got a machine showing that, is the science of cause. It is not the science of effects. And because of that, standard science and standard engineering deals with effects. It's just like medicine. The medical profession deals with symptoms. Symptoms are effects of some other cause. We want to go to the ultimate cause, and the ultimate cause of everything in the universe is mind. Some people call it consciousness or awareness. There's many different terms, and that's the other problem with this. There's so many different people who have studied this and put their own twist on it. And so I have gathered the researches of many, many, many people and tried to correlate where they match and where they don't match, because I'm trying to fill the holes in the material, the Keeley that we have of Keeley's. And there's a lot of holes. Russell fills in quite a few of them. So, for instance, if you pick up any religious treatise, they talk about the cause of the universe as God. Well, the word G-O-D is a label to this creative force that brought the universe into being and manages it from moment to moment for billions of years. If we look at Russell's work, he says the ultimate cause of the universe is the mind of God. Okay, if we look at Keeley's work, he says the ultimate cause of the universe is the mind of deity. If we go back to the Sanskrit religions and Hindu and Buddhism, they talk about consciousness as being the ultimate substrate from which the universe is derived. Okay, those are great theories. But how does thought of mind become matter? And can thought manipulate matter? Can matter be subject to mind, thought in mind? Keeley often used the word volition, which I find a very good term because it's not a red flag term. We don't already have an interpretation on that term. Volition is just pure thought. According to Russell, mind has three states, and this is substantiated by Keeley's work. There's the quiescent mind, the quiet mind, which you would find associated with, let's say, a Buddhist monk meditating. Perfectly quiet mind. It's not doing anything. It's just being aware. That's the neutral state of mind. The other two states are when that mind goes into activity of thinking. Thinking is a powerful force. It governs our whole lives. Every day, every minute of every day, our thinking develops our life experience. So we can have a positive mental attitude and things work well for us, and we're happy and joyful, or we can be negative and everything goes to crap. So those are the three states of mind: quiet, neutral, positive, and negative thought. Number 3. That's it. This chart is a synthesis of Walter Russell. You can see the numbers. There's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 plus plus at carbon, and then -3, -2, -1, and back to 0. That's the Russell part of this chart. The basic design here is a flow. It goes around in a circle like this. Quiet mind is represented by the 0, which in the Russell philosophy and the Keeley philosophy and everybody else's is a neutral state. It's perfect potential. But it can't be measured and it can't be sensed and it can't be known because it does not move. There is no motion at this point. That would correspond to God. Now you got to remember, I really dislike using that word because it misleads people to think something I'm not meaning. You only use a term because that's a point of reference for a lot of people. If there is a potential in the universe from which can be derived the universe, that's it right there. And I believe, and this is my personal interpretation, that 0 represents true scalar potential. Not a scalar wave, but scalar potential. From here, there begins an introductory impulse, and we probably never understand what this is, but that perfect quietness becomes disturbed. The instant it becomes disturbed, there is set up a bias or a polarity, positive and negative, of a very low amplitude. And that begins to accumulate in potential, accumulating energy as it goes around this circle. So we get up to gluons, and they start forming the bosons, and then we come into the primary elements, hydrogen. This rectangle here represents all the material universe, all the elements that we're aware of. So the first elements to form are hydrogen, and then they keep compounding and concentrating energy. It's like taking a seesaw that's perfectly horizontal and balanced and applying energy on both sides at the same time, accumulating more and more energy in a balanced state. That's the idea that Russell's conveying here. And when it reaches the 4++ level at carbon, he maintains that that's the highest epitome of this ability to accumulate balanced energy. And which is probably true, I don't know. But once it reaches carbon, it starts to degrade and degenerate. It starts giving up this energy that's on each side of the seesaw. So when we get down here in the heavier elements, the components that make the element are starting to radiate away from that element. It's starting to give it back to the universe. It's starting to decay and degenerate. And eventually it'll go back through the fermionic stage, neutrinos, and back to the 0 point. So on this right-hand side of the chart is your quiet mind side, and this side over the matter side is the thinking side of the mind force. So I could get into all kinds of details about the angular, the geometry of this, or the vibration part of it, or the oscillatory part of it, but we don't have enough time to get into all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to convey this, that this circle, this cycle, is what Russell called the universal unit of motion. And everything in the universe has this universal unit of motion. And the ancients referred to it as the law of one. And everything that exists, every action, every event, has to go through this cycle in one form or another. If we're not seeing a cycle, it's because we haven't interpreted what we're perceiving. And so to go from one element to any other element, all we need to do is understand the parameters that govern those relationships of energies. Change any one of the 18 parameters that we theorize are involved, that Russell says are involved, and we can change one to the other. Let's go. Yeah, the other one. That one. So in going through the prior chart where we go from the right to the left, forming matter, this is another way of seeing the same thing. And many people have talked about this, but they didn't go into the detail that Russell did in a cyclical nature. So at the center is that 0 point where we have the beginning of all things. And for instance, the Keeley paradigm breaks down. He broke it down into 9 levels, 9, 8, 7, etc., all the way down to molecular matter on the outside of the rim. And these are the different paradigms and expressions of that construct where the chart went from the right to the left in the matter. That's what this represents. So instead of going from the right to the left, we're going from the center outward. And many different people have worked on this and presented it. For example, here's the popular way of looking at it, the quantum level atoms and molecules. So they go from the smaller to the larger. And it's kind of curious because if you take EMC squared and extrapolate it, the denser a particle is, the smaller a particle is, the more energy it's got. So that indicates to us that matter, an atom for instance, is actually a bubble in this substrate of space. It's more like a bubble. It's not a bubble, but it's more like a bubble than hard, dense matter. It's just the opposite of what you'd think. So these particulates, like the quantum particles, are much more energetic than the atoms, and the atoms more energetic than the molecules. So we get more energy out of a nuclear blast than we do a gallon of gasoline because we're dealing in a higher energy state. Now, to tie into mind, here we got the Dinosphere in this center, and we've got all these people going through all these experiences. And it appears to be a connection between mind and the subtle energies, what some people call the subtle energies, which takes place in this 8th level, the 7th and 8th level, and sometimes even the 6th level.
What are those 4 words around God? I know the bottom one is consciousness.
Word, light, Christ, consciousness. These are just different synonyms in different contexts to convey the idea that we as humans have the ability to have greater awareness.
Could you repeat those 4 words?
They're borrowed words from different disciplines. Word, like from the Bible.
Yes.
Like
What word is that?
word, W-O-R-D.
W-O-R-D?
D. Yeah, word.
Okay.
Like in the beginning there was the word. Okay. So these are labels borrowed from different disciplines. And they all, in my mind, mean the same thing. And what they mean is, this is what some people call cosmic consciousness. For instance, it's what Edgar Cayce experienced when he went to sleep. His mind was then aware of anything he wanted it to be aware of. So there's this global mind, if you want to call it that we can all have access to. Geniuses have more access to it than a dollar, for instance. But that's the only difference between the two people, is greater or lesser access to this global mind. There's only one mind throughout the universe, which manifests itself as discrete molecules on the outside. So there's no difference between the cause and its effects, except in our interpretation of it. When we built a dynasphere, each part that was constructed was treated manually. I did it myself. For instance, some of you are familiar with bending spoons. Well, the same energy you put into preparing the spoon to bend, we put into each and every part of that machine. And it takes on a whole new feeling when you do that. One thing I want to remark right up front is women are much more responsive to this than men. Much more. I mean, women just flock around this thing. They feel this energy. They understand. One of the things I learned at the center in Tulsa was a lot about women, because they would come up to this thing and they would start expressing aspects of themselves that they don't normally do in ordinary social context. And there's a whole other realm out there, guys, that we're not even familiar with. So we treat the metal, and then we've got a little canister that we create a gas, a vaporous gas, very much like Brown's gas. And we introduce that gas into the center of the sphere. And then that gas is not combusted or compressed or in any way, but I believe it's very sensitive to acoustic forces, so this gas starts to expand and contract like a heartbeat. And it's from this basic motion of the universe. Remember when we went around the chart, the first chart, that we start from zero pressure up to the epitome of pressure, which is atoms in a diamond. So we go from no pressure to high pressure, no pressure to high pressure, in the center of that dynasphere. And I began to suspect, when I read some article about the brain, and when I say brain, I do not mean mind. I mean the gray molecular matter between your ears. The mind permeates the brain. It's like a radio wave. A radio broadcast permeates a radio, but the radio is not the broadcast. It's the vehicle or means by which the broadcast may be rendered from one frequency range to another. That's what the gray matter of the brain. But anyway, I was reading about the brain, and they were talking about these hollow spaces in the brain, physical hollow spaces in our brains, that have water in them. And since I've studied Brown's gas and all these kinds of things, well, when a person utters vowel sounds, like the Tibetan monks, they do that tremendous toning that they do, causes a cavitation of that water, a very light cavitation, very, very, very subtle. It's not something like we would use in engineering. It's just a very subtle phenomenon. This is total theory on my part. And that would coincide with what Keely said, that the nerves that travel throughout the body are not governed by the electrical currents that go through the nerves or around the nerves, but an etheric current. In Keely's terminology, an etheric current is a current of the superfine particles up here in the quantum realm. So if we disassociate water to a much finer gas, a plasma type gas, that's Keely's ether. There's no mystery about it. It's a subquantum or quantum plasmic gas type substance. And he said it was that etheric fluid, he called it a fluid that flows, is what travels down through the body along the nerves that evokes action. Then we piece that together with what Keely was talking about. The etheric currents are what cause rotation in his machines. And that what governed that was the dominant current. And the dominant current is the mind current, the thought. So you put all this stuff together and you say, well, gee, thought is sympathetic. We've got a thought substance in a dinosaur. We've got thought substance in people. And there's a sympathetic action going on between the two. So what is happening in one happens to the other. And because of the way we built that thing and we conditioned it, if people are in a positive mental state, they're happy, joyful, just having a good time, that dinosphere, energy around it, seems to respond and begin to increase. And that is when we've seen it move. And that's the only time we've seen it move. When there's people around it who are not happy and not having a good time, like I've had an engineer or two around it and they just did not like any of it, this energy field collapses. And it needs remedy. It needs to be brought back into that harmonic state, that sympathetic state in which it best operates. So, if we can go back to that first, oh, the man's not here. So we have a substance, a very high-level substance, quantum and subquantum, like the quark state, for instance. It appears to be the substance through which thought acts. Like, for instance, we say radio waves go through the electron fields. And in this case, thought goes through this quarkian or etheric field. Put that first chart back. No, the first one. So if thought is active up here on this energy level, and this is where thought is active because we have non-motive thought here, just quiet thought. Then when it begins to think in reaction to what it perceives its environment to be or that it wants it to be, then it becomes polar and this polarization starts building and building and building and building and building. And we start getting to this thing called a gluon. Well, a gluon, and this, here again, I'm going to interject my own interpretation of these things. A gluon is not a thing. It is a unit of measure. It's a unit of attraction. So we've got this phenomenon up here of things starting to attract together. And this mutual attraction, which Keely called mutual affinity, or sympathetic attraction, or neutral negative attraction, he had a lot of terms for it. Russell called it electricity. He said electrical is attractive. It's not repulsive. What it looks like repulsive. He said it's actually attractive. So we've got this accumulating energy. There's something here that's assimilating itself more and more and more and more and concentrating like a snowball going down a hill. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and faster and faster. Gluons bunched together eventually become these bosons, which start to form into larger and larger particles. That's I think that's probably our break point right there at the boson level, where it goes from an atomic level or even a subatomic level directly into the molecular level. So we have big units attracted together mutually, and they start to form into the atoms. And this assimilative force constantly assimilates itself to itself until it reaches carbon, at which point it reaches this place of maximum pressure. One thing that this does, and it took a tremendous weight off my shoulders, before I read Russell and began to really understand what he was saying, I had such a burden on me because to me the universe was unlimited and infinite, and who the heck could ever dare to endeavor to understand what this universe is. But when I read Russell, I realized it's not infinite. The expressions of this, the expressions in their complexities can be infinite, but the direct expressions, for instance, in the elemental table, is limited. We got a finite problem here. It's not infinite, and that just liberated me from all kinds of horror thoughts. But anyway, it gets to the carbon, and that assimilative force reverts. And we don't fully yet understand this process of reversion, and that's going to be one of the big secrets. Some of the scalar people are looking for the trigger to release some of this energy. Well, that trigger is somehow bound up in this inversion from one state, the accumulative state, to the dispersing or repulsive state. There's just a flip-flop takes place. And that occurs, for some reason, just beyond carbon. It's probably carbon isotope, I don't know. But then, from assimilation, it goes into repulsion. These particles start becoming mutually repulsive around each other. They don't want to be near each other anymore. And they want to go back home, which is back to this quiet place. So they start scattering and scattering and scattering, and you can't even squeeze them together. They're doing that nowadays with super cold experiments to condense fermions. But that's not their natural state. We have to study the natural stuff. And then through dispersion, like from the sun, we get this shower of neutrinos. See, the sun has condensed itself, and now it's starting to radiate. And all it's doing is going back to this, what the ancients called the celestial realm, or the father force, or the male force. They're all synonyms. All these are all synonyms. Idea is not a thing, it's just an idea, so it has no polarization until we think it into being by giving it power, giving it activity. In Keely's terminology, this state over here is called the dipolar state. There's no activity in a depolarized situation, it's just neutral. Well, yeah, let's go there. Here's a chart that everybody should be familiar with. It's your standard vortex framework. This chart is not totally complete. If we put that first chart up here in this corner, then we begin to understand what's happening. So we go over here to where the zero is, and we go up through the gluons and the bosons and start into this is where the atoms start to form, because we've got the coincidence of these two forces coming together and building up that energy like on the two sides of the seesaw. But after that, they begin to disperse backwards or radiate back to the mutual repulsion, fleeing from the center. This is going toward the center. So if you want to work with accumulating energy, you got to go up on this side of the chart. Standard physics deals on this side of the chart. This is down here is entropic activity or chaos. This is where everything goes to pot, and it can't get back put together. And this is the only thing that standard physics really, truly recognizes. This whole other half of the universe is not even acknowledged. This is the negentropic or the centropic forces. This is the life side of this chart. This is where life is. This forms into life, this forms into the plants and the animals, and forms planets. But once they reach that certain place of maturity, then they start to fall apart and go back to where they came from. The human body deteriorates, goes back to dust of the earth. And So what happens when all this starts to happen, you get this pulsing right here in the center that's accumulating to the higher energy state, going back to the lower energy state. There is set up in a framework that I'm not 100% sure about. We start to get this rotation. And the faster that rotates, the faster the pulsations go, the faster this rotation. And we already talked about E equals mc squared. We get more and more energy built up in this spinning little tiny particle. By the way, I really dislike the word particle. Wish we'd get rid of it from our vocabulary. What's actually happening, in my view, is a centralization of forces about a center. There's no real particle there. There's nothing there. There's nothing hard there. It's motion. It's just forces in motion around each other create what appears to be a solid object. And we already know that's not true. You know, there is no solid object there. So what we're dealing with in the dynasphere, the other problem with the dynasphere, which we got sidetracked on, trying to figure out this heart and mind connection to it, well, what about the physical? How about the rotation? Because we've got this whole thing going anyway. And in that effort to understand the cause of rotation, not the effect of it. We can describe the effect 16 ways from Sunday in standard physics, but we have no clue, and I have never found one document in the standard literature that says one iota about rotation. And the only place I found anything about rotation is Keeley and Russell. But when they talk about it, it's outside of our context, our frame of reference, so I've had to educate myself in their mindsets. Okay, what are these people talking about? And why do they say the things they say? And it boils down to this phenomena where we have this incoming high energy and this outgoing to low energy. And when I said we had the gas and the dynasphere expanding and contracts, that creates that situation. That's the universal unit of motion. There are certain circumstances, physical circumstances, if you want to use that term, that contribute or go to create that rotary motion. And I'm having some unexpected but very appreciated help in analyzing these circumstances, these configurations of forces that result in motion, rotary motion. It's very complicated. It is not simple. I think it would be simple once we get it done. But right now, it's the most challenging work I've ever done. In fact, I've already put years into it. So up here where it says sympathetic affinity, that's what I was talking about, the cumulative power coming into the center. This accumulates into the center. And that's why, another word I sometimes don't like to use is the word love, because nobody understands what it is. But love is nothing more than sympathy, sympathetic action, sympathetic association, sympathetic resonance. Those are all synonyms for love. So it's not something airy-fairy and touchy-feely. This is a physical phenomena. Even these particles sense that, and when they sense it, they come together because they're in mutual resonance. There was some work done in the 1800s in Paris. One of the original engineers in the Manhattan Project gave me this paper, and it was one of the most telling documents I ever got. And it talks about vibrating or oscillating two different tiny metallic balls. And when the frequencies are the same, they come together. And when the frequencies are different, they go apart. So sympathetic vibration, which nowadays they're trying to call quantum entanglement, when the particles have the same chords of vibration, they come together. What are you going to call that? You can call it love, and you're not wrong. So that's what's happening here. When we have a group of people around a dynasphere having a good time, they're feeling good about themselves, they're not at war with the world, they're happy, these particles start to concentrate. That gas that's in the dynasphere starts to concentrate to the center. More and more and more power accumulates in the center of that dynasphere, and it's going like this, faster and faster and faster and faster, until at some point it moves. And I firmly believe that that's what's happening inside of this thing. which may explain why, over the past 50 or 100 years, we've seen various individuals create various free energy devices that worked. But the minute somebody else came in to see it, it wouldn't work. Usually these people are older people. I've met a couple of them. They're kind. They're comfortable with themselves. They're not warring with themselves or the world. And this etheric force accumulates to the center of whatever it is they're doing, and they can work with it. But as soon as the skeptic comes in, boom, that thing is gone. It's just dissipated, just like that. There's no energy left in it. And so no wonder it can't work. It won't work. It's impossible for it to work. In fact, we had a guy come in who was a trained engineer, and he had an attitude. He had a real attitude. And he brought that with him. Didn't have anything to do with what I was doing or the machine. And he kept on with his attitude and this energy. I just stood there dumbfounded with my mouth open watching this happen. And you could feel this energy, this aggravating energy, this mutual antagonism was set up. And this guy became so uncomfortable that he basically ran out of the room. So he was generating his own experience. Other people just come in and they just fall in love with this thing. I mean, it was very disconcerting the first couple of years, having this thing out in public. I did not know what was happening. So I think what I need to do is sum up some of this stuff. We've got this quantum realm that appears to be sympathetically sensitive to thought. It appears that is the thought realm. And we can manipulate this by maintaining our own acumen or our own personalities, developing our personalities, which necessarily follows that the more you develop yourself as a positive human being, you're happy and comfortable with the world, you have more access to this energy. If you're not, if you're grumpy, or you want to develop a weapon because you're thinking in your mind, you want to go over and kill 1 million people or whatever, whatever your attitude is, it isn't going to happen. It will not happen. So that's it kind of in a nutshell. I wanted to use this time to explain some of this stuff because a lot of people out there didn't understand what I was doing. I'm not dealing in religion. I am not a cult. I don't want to be anybody's leader. I'm just trying to answer some questions. And just because they're odd questions and because they may make you feel uncomfortable when you first hear about it, which they did to me, doesn't mean we run from them. It means we confront them. And we say, what is this thing that's going on? And that's kind of the summary of what I've done. How much time do we have for questions? Assuming we have any. Is there any questions?
Can you get copies of your charts?
Almost every one of these charts are on my website. And if you look at my website and you can't find something you want, I'll go looking for it. I'll help you get what you want.
Please come down to this microphone for questions.
No more questions?
What is your website?
I beg your pardon?
Your website?
SVP. It's svpvril.com. I've posted all the work that I found from Keely's time. Everything I've been able to put on that website, I've put up there.
What was that website again?
SV. V.
Real quick. What is it?
SV.
G.
No, V is in Victor.
SV.
P.
SV.
P.
P.
V. No, V.
SVP.
V.
D.
V. 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 Victor.
Okay. Go ahead. You do it. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yes. I was talking with you yesterday, and it seems like what you were saying just now I'm a little bit confused with what you were saying at your table yesterday. Did I hear you saying just now that there are times when you have people around who are in an open, happy, non-confrontational mode, that the device will actually, the device that you have out here will spin?
It doesn't actually spin. It only partially moves. Spin, when I say spin, it goes all the way around. We haven't had it go all the way around.
But it will move.
Yes, it has moved 15 to 20 times under those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only circumstance I've seen when it did move.
So you were just standing around, happy-go-lucky,
just chit-chatting, having a good time.
And the thing starts turning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Did you want to open anything on your website?
No. Yeah, that's the website. This testimonial page is a lot of testimonials from many different people who have experienced healings of different kinds. Not all of them, but just the people who are willing to come forward with it. A lot of those healings were completely unexpected. I mean, I didn't expect any of this. This was just dumped in my lap. And I'm swimming with it or, trying to tread water with it as best I can. Do you have a question?
Yeah. With your Dynasphere, is there any external input other than the natural vibrations of the universe to make it work? In other words, is there any external forces or, artificial
Like
external
an energy,
forces?
like plugging it into the wall or something?
Yeah.
No, there's none like that. The stories from Keely's time, he would start the machine with a violin. It'd be a sympathetic response. We'd get this machine to spin. But he knew what he was doing, and we haven't quite reached that point yet.
So you've set this thing, it's set in motion essentially by natural forces of the universe.
Right.
Okay.
It's a natural principle that governs this rotation.
Hi. My question is, have anybody or have you noticed that the device acts like as a thought energy amplifier? To amplify mental activity, mental thoughts?
Amplifier?
If you visualize something that you want, will it serve as a device to amplify those thought energies?
What it does, in my opinion, I've got to piece this together, is it creates this field. By the way, nature of its construction and materials, there's this field around it that is highly harmonic, is a very balanced field. So people coming into that field, if they're willing, not everybody's willing, can get in sympathy or synchronous feeling with that field. And from our studies of how to open one's mind to the greater mind, an absolutely essential prerequisite is peace and quiet. So when a person begins to bring their busy thinking into a state of peace and quiet or non-thinking mind, then all these things start happening. So it's not a concept of power or amplitude. It's more like a concept of cue. You get rid of the discordant things, and what you got left is your perfect harmony. And it's from that state of perfect quiet that we can attain greater knowledge, greater wisdom, greater happiness. That's when it all starts to inflow to us. But our busy thinking keeps it pushed away from us because we're on the downside of that chart. We want to be on the upside of the chart. That's the life, light, and love of the universe, and that's where we want to be. And science totally ignores it. So that's what I see. It's not a question of cranking up the amplitude. I mean, that would just make it worse, actually, if we did that.
Thank you very much.
Dale, just a quick question. I see that there's a lot of love that went into that machine as far as creating it, and it shows. But have you tried any biofeedback techniques to instrument, to be able to...
No, we haven't.
To look at
Yeah, I've done all this work, or we've done all this work on a shoestring, and sometimes half a shoestring. We haven't had funds or money, and I haven't really found people in different areas, like a biofeedback expert, who had the right kind of mind and heart condition to work with this. I mean, there's plenty of people out there who are cynical. We don't want those because they'll just disperse whatever energies we have in it. In part, when I had all these people come around the machine and I watch what's going on, that has been my feedback mechanism.
But what I was thinking is like where they have EEG sensors, ways that you could actually correlate and quantify what you're saying here, which is very subjective.
I know. We haven't had the funds, and we haven't done it.
Hi, Dale.
Hi.
I really enjoyed looking at your machine. My purpose in being at this conference is what I would consider a left brain reason. I'm here with my financial hat on. And so when I went up to your machine and tried to get something from it at first, it did absolutely nothing for me until I changed modes when you kept talking about females have easier access to it. I also teach a telepathic communication workshop. And so I was getting into that mode, and it instantly hit me right here and here. And I felt a lot of energy from it, and it started amplifying my energy. But it was more like I had to give to it in order to get back from it. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was a really interesting experience that I couldn't be in my left brain mode at all.
That's right.
To get anything from it, I had to go over to the right brain mode. Mm-hmm. And in my study of cognitive psychology, I think this would make a lot of sense, that you are accessing something through a different mode. A lot of the devices and everything, apparatuses are are dealing with the left brain, and I think what yours is a right brain, and I think that's really interesting that this conference is covering both sides of the issue, that we're doing both the right brain and the left brain, because I think that's really necessary if we're going to make progress in this field. So I thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dale, for your presentation.